Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
Well, it is a beautiful Thursday morning from here in Lagos. I am Kairi Okikiodu.
And I'm Ayamakide. Welcome to the show.
Okay, so yes, indeed, what a day it was yesterday. And who knows, I mean, different things just playing themselves out as we progress. But today we got Mr. Bimbola Toki joining us to take a look at some of the dailies and see what they reflect this morning. So, good morning, and thank you for joining us as well, Mr. Toki.
Yes, a pleasure to be here again. Good morning, all.
All right, so let's start off with Vanguard newspaper today and look at their lead here. Insecurity, protests in Abuja, Lagos, Ondo, Osogbo. Protesters lament state of nation, want insecurity, unemployment tackled. 100 revolution now, protesters arrested, released. Protesters arrested for flouting COVID-19 protocols, FCT Lagos Police. And then security men locked down Kano against protesters, and protesters too small to react to presidency source. So that's what you find on the front page of Vanguard newspaper. So Mr. Toki, this, yes, and then you see the pictures, images of these protesters. Not the first time that they are hitting the streets about it, but it appears as though they just want to be heard.
Yes, of course, this should be expected. It's not getting easy for ordinary Nigerians, and it's getting pretty difficult almost on a daily basis. People are finding it difficult to feed themselves. The economic situation is getting very unfriendly on a daily basis, and if people are pushed to the wall, this is what we expect. You know, and I think government should just be proactive about it and ensure they wake up from the slumber and ensure that people get to, the job is not there, you know, people can't afford 3 square meals a day, and people keep losing jobs on a daily basis. The insecurity is also getting to an alarming stage. You know, when you go out in the morning, you are not sure you will get back home in the evening. Everywhere is unsafe. And so there's need for change of strategy by this government. Otherwise, we are yet to see protests. I mean, real and unimaginable proportion of protest in Nigeria.
Well, speaking about security, what do you make of this? Al-Qaeda penetrating northwest U.S. alerts Nigeria.
Yes, I think that's as a result of they are being pushed out of Syria. And government of the region supposed to know this and plan for this even well ahead of time. You know, this is not something, the Al-Qaeda issue is not something that you be reactive about. You have to be proactive about this. And I also learned that even they are coming to the region is at the planning stage. So one will expect the government of the region to be proactive and plan ahead of this Al-Qaeda. You know, it's time for intelligence sharing and cooperation among the government in the region, so that even at the planning stage, the Al-Qaeda can be dealt with. Because by the time they unleashed their terror on the region, it will not be easy at all. So one will expect the regional government, I mean all the governments in the region, to cooperate together, share information, share intelligence, to ensure that these people are really dealt with at the planning stage. I think that's.
But you know, so speaking about this sharing of information, planning, and intelligence, remember there was a time where there was a lot of commentary about Western, at least soldiers, intelligence agencies coming to the country or assisting the country with intelligence. So one wonders, what do you think became of that? Because all of a sudden it appears as though everything just went cold.
You know, these people, they are not resting on their horse. Even when you dislodge them now, they go back to regroup and re-strategize. and launch themselves again. So it behoves on the government to keep planning and to ensure that those who are in charge are doing something. You know, the issue of the service chiefs, I don't want to dwell much on that, but it has been a recurring decimal. You know, if the service chiefs, if they are run out of ideas, I mean, nothing says, the only person who knows what is happening as far as the service chiefs is concerned, especially in this country, is the president. Almost every other person have lost confidence in the current service chiefs. But the president is not even telling us why he's keeping them. All institutions have said, let these people go and rest. But the problem, the president is insisting that they should be there. He's the only one that knows the reason why they are there, and is not telling Nigerians why they are there up to now. These are some of the challenges that we are facing. Remember, few weeks ago, the National Assembly went to the president to say, these service chiefs should be changed. Up till now, we have not heard anything. I mean, these are part of the problems, and you begin to wonder whether we even have a government who is responsive to all these mirage of problems that we are having in this country. It is quite worrisome, and I think that the media should not rest on their horse to keep hammering until they do what is right.
Remember, there was a time when Western countries did say they were going to assist Nigeria with intelligence about Boko Haram, how to tackle it. What do you think became of that? Because at the moment, it just appears as though there's no more conversation about that.
Well, if there's no cooperation or the response is not as expected, what do you expect? You know, U.S., for instance, has been very friendly with us in Nigeria as far as the issue of Boko Haram is concerned. But they also need you to be responsive. They need you to be proactive. They need you to play your own part well. So when you are not able to do that, those who want to help you, they become helpless. And this is the kind of situation that arises when you don't do what you're supposed to do as a government, and the other people are willing to help you. They are not seeing the kind of zeal that they should see in order for them to be able to come to your aid. So it's not only about that. There are many other issues that have been abandoned, especially from our partners abroad. It is just, it is not a good situation at all.
Yeah, well, some of the headlines here. Probe Senate queries more expenditure by NDDC's IMC. And then below that, you've got the FCC will give you fair hearing, Salami tells Michael. But look at the back page now. Vanguard Osimhen to paint Serie A with goals. So that's a good one for Nigerians. And then it says, it's not finished. So while they look ahead of the UEFA Champions League, it's going to be an interesting weekend. So that's Vanguard today.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at The Guardian for you. The big story. Uncertainty rules fuel pump price. That's how The Guardian leads this morning. Uncertainty rules fuel pump price. Yeah, that sounds like how they put it. And you see the writers, PPPRA mum, as petrol may sell between 150 and 157 naira per litre. In fact, there are reports of people actually purchasing petrol for 148, 150 in Lagos, Kano. So that's where we are at right now. You see the other rider, NNPC records 2.68 billion naira trading surplus, lower pipeline vandalism. Basically saying that it seems as though the environment is good. And when you check the price of crude also, it's not as high as you'll expect. And you wonder why our petrol price is not dropping, since this is meant to fluctuate with the price of crude, as it were. So, Mr. Toki, what do you make of this?
Well, as far as the fuel pump pricing is concerned, you know, Nigerians and Nigeria, we have been postponing the evil days for long. But now the days are here. You know, the issue of this fuel thing has become a recurring decimal. But now we are going into the real pool of it. And the subsidy of a thing is what's supposed to have been removed even long before now. And this is why I call it evil days, that is just being postponed. But now that government is coming to realize that the subsidy is no longer sustainable, well, I hope that whatever that has been used in the subsidy in the past, and whatever recovery that government is able to make out of this subsidy will be used to develop the infrastructure, will be used to develop capital projects that will impact positively on the lives of Nigerians. But as far as subsidy is concerned, it must be removed, and the time is now. Let's face it, so that we see how, of course, corruption is not friendly as far as subsidy is concerned. Let's see whether it will be, whatever that is recovered as a subsidy will be used judiciously to the betterment of Nigerians.
But what do you make of the perceived silence of the PPPRA? Because, I mean, they've been given guidelines on the price of petrol monthly from March, April, May, June, July, and August comes, and, I mean, this is the 5th of August, if I'm correct. In fact, this is the 6th of August, to be specific, and we've not heard anything concerning that. And as you would expect, in fact, Ipman has directed some members to start selling from 150 naira, and we need that sort of guideline. Let's know what the price should be, so people don't just, go out there and sell for however amount they want to sell. So what do you make of that silence?
Well, maybe they're also trying to gauge the impulse of Nigerians as to, the one increase was how many weeks ago? So it's not something, we are just getting used to it. It's not something that you just wake up one day and add to the problems on ground. So maybe they are using that to just gauge the impulse of Nigerians before. And as a matter of fact, by this morning, most of the filling stations have changed their price. This is what we have to face. And the regulatory authority, they are just trying to be clever by half. They know where they are going. They know that this is what is going to happen. They don't just want to make it to be so sudden. And before the end of today, all filling stations in Nigeria will change their pump price to 150. There's nothing anybody can do about that.
I mean, if you say that maybe they're trying to gauge the pulse of Nigerians, well, for a pulse, I'd like to say Nigerians are not happy about this, but now that you say these are the evil days, we just hope something good comes out of this one. But, away from that, you see the revolutionary protests rocking Abuja, Lagos also makes front page of The Guardian this morning. Riders, police arrest, detain and charge activists, even though there was a statement from the police saying, we didn't arrest any revolutionary protesters. See, defined group holds rally in Abuja, wants 1999 constitution scrapped. We're back to Abacha days, says Deji Adeyanju. Serap wants arrests probed. Agba Jalingo, other detainees released in Lagos. That story starts on the front page and continues on page 6. But see this one, concerning COVID-19, just right on top of the big caption on the front page. Osinbajo assures Nigerians of access to coronavirus vaccines. Apparently, a lot of people were worried, thinking, wait a minute, are we going to be left behind when if the vaccine arrives? But then there's this assurance from the vice president saying we won't be left behind. But that seems like a long shot from now. It's been months into this COVID-19 pandemic for Nigeria. Seeing the figures now, seeing the response, are you confident that we're getting to that bus stop where we transition maybe to the next phase?
Well, as far as COVID-19 and the making of the drugs are concerned, I think I won't be surprised if Nigeria actually contribute its own quota to the discovery of these drugs. We have best brains in Nigeria. I have friends who are pharmacists. I have friends who are doctors, and we have them all over the world doing wonderfully well. So I won't be surprised if in the coming days, months, and maybe early next year, we have something to cheer about as far as the COVID-19 drug is concerned. We have the wherewithal. We have everything at our disposal here to contribute positively to eradicating COVID-19 through discovery of necessary drugs in this country. So I won't be surprised with what, I'm actually not surprised with what the Vice President said, that Nigeria is capable of getting these drugs out. And I think it's just only a matter of time. Just a matter of time.
The Daily Trust newspaper leads this morning with pretty much the same stories that we have mentioned. Outrageous marketers increase fuel price to 150 naira per litre. Daily Trust is precise. Hike will worsen inflation, according to experts. Small businesses at receiving end, according to Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. And FG keeps silence. Story is on page 5. Already made reference to that earlier. Al-Qaeda infiltrating Northwest. U.S. alerts Nigeria. Perhaps that's their own way of sharing information. Page 4 of the Daily Trust has that one. Please arrest revolution now. Protesters, we mentioned all of that. But there is this one under the picture you see on the front page. 48 hours after endorsing Izeyamo, Edo Deputy Speaker impeached. There's been seems like a wave, what's happening in Edo State. What do you make of it?
Well, that's the interesting part about Nigerian politics. You know, you keep seeing dramas almost on daily basis. And so until after the election in Edo State, the drama cannot cease. So impeachment is one of the dramas that we need to see. Nigerian politics, and you know, both the two major parties in Nigeria, they are almost the same. One is crossing to the other today, is coming back tomorrow. You know, this is no longer anything surprising to any of us again in this country. After the election, everything will come back to normal. So it's part of what we see every day, and it has become part and parcel of us. The way people play politics in this part of the world leaves more to be desired. What reason would they say will have led to the impeachment of the speaker, if not for the deputy speaker, if not purely for political reason, which nobody anywhere can. In fact, the way some of these people take it is like we are immature politically. And that is very, very unfortunate.
But on the one hand is the role of politicians, and on the other hand is the impact on the electorate, right?
Well, the electorate, are they even bothered again? Many of the electorate, they are not even bothered again. That is why you see that at every election, there is low turnout. Many people don't even believe in the process. I won't be surprised if a turnout in Edo is quite low. You know, morale are not boosted. People are just disappointed. In fact, so many things that people have to worry about. So this election is just one of those things that will come and go, and everything will come back to normal.
Take a look at News Direct next. $79.3 billion debt stock. China, not a major funding source for Nigeria. This is ascribed to the DMO. And the writer says, loan from China represents 3.94%. This has been going on for a while. I'm not sure it's going to go away yet. But this morning, this is what you get.
It will definitely not go away in a hurry. And especially with the discovery of the sovereignty issue that became part of the discourse. You know, trust Nigerians. There's nothing wrong in getting loans to develop economies, be it locally. In fact, every country gets loan. But what do you use the loan for? I think that's just the reason why Nigerians don't believe, have lost confidence in the leadership is because after getting this loan, what percentage of it goes into the private pocket? You know, you can see that so many people are now interested in the China loan, not because of the good thing it will bring to Nigeria. It's also because of other ulterior motives. You know, so I mean, we need reorientation in Nigeria. It is getting bad and bad. And you know, China is already looking at it again to see, will these people pay back our money if we give them? You know, they're already looking at it. And it will be a major disaster if that loan is cancelled, because they've already earmarked the loan for certain projects. So it's going to be a major disaster, and that is Nigeria for you.
Yeah, but why do you think that the loan will be cancelled at this stage?
Look at all the furor that has generated. It has generated.
Yeah, but it's a democracy. Nigerians have to talk about it. It's their country.
Oh, so the lender will worry about your own internal democracy.
Well, if
to
they're
the detriment
sign...
of their own money, it won't work like that.
I mean,
we are not talking of 1 million naira here. We are talking of several billions of naira. And when the lender is saying that you are not in agreement, especially major institutions, the National Assembly, the executive and the legislature, they can't come together to say, yes, this is where we are going. And you want the lender to just see and give you money just like that? It's not done.
Isn't that why they should have ensured that it was transparent from the onset rather than get to this stage? Because if people find that there are loopholes and there are questions, they certainly will ask them, because they will be the ones to pay back.
That is part of the Nigerian problem. You know, I don't see anything. Even the National Assembly is supposed to have been carried along right from the onset. If they have been carried along, if they don't have anything to hide, why will it be now that the National Assembly will be picking holes in the agreement? Why will it be now? Why would the National Assembly not even be carried? Why necessary committee, when you travel to China to negotiate this loan, necessary committee from the National Assembly should be part of that process. So if they are part of this process, all these cries and hula baloo will not be what we should be seeing now.
But in order to see if they can put this to rest, should they just come up with all the details, let them know what are the contracts, what clauses, what did we actually sign? Shouldn't that be one of the ways to go moving forward?
Very simple. The whole files will be brought out for scrutiny. Lay everything bare on the floor of the National Assembly. Let them discuss it. Let them look at all the agreements. Let them tidy it up. And you know, Nigeria is becoming a laughing stock when you are talking of the deal, the loan you have already signed, and all these problems are springing up left, right, and center. I mean, it marks on seriousness on the part of the leadership of this country.
Okay, let's quickly take a look at the Daily Times this morning. Big story, as you'll expect. Police revolution, now protesters lock horns. It's interesting how they captioned that, and you see a picture that shows protesters yesterday, and no horns. So you'll have to take a look at page 2 to get a sense of how or why the paper put it that way. But see this one over insecurity quickly. Outrage over Kaduna killings as state government says 15 billion naira spent on security. So it appears as though the government is saying we have put in a lot to end insecurity in the state. 15 billion naira. But from what you have seen, does it look like that?
Well, we keep hearing such figures every day, so we're already used to it. 15 billion for what? I mean, it's unheard of. We have been hearing a lot of big and spurious amount of money, even on COVID, spending on COVID. You know, corruption is like it has come to live with us in Nigeria, and even people are not even looking back. On daily basis, you hear bogus amount of money being spent on this and that. You know, unnecessary spending everywhere, every corner. It is very unreasonable. It is unheard of, and I think the president should just wake up. The leadership, the Azura should wake up from his slumber and let Nigerians be proud of the government at this time. Everybody has lost confidence. There is, people are just waiting for the remaining 3 years to go so that we can breathe a new lease of life. It's becoming so burdensome. I mean, the government is becoming so burdensome, and it is not getting funny at all.
All right, then, Mr. Bimbola Toki, editor of Business World, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts this morning. We will be back in a moment. Stay with us.
Solidarity songs, the usual bite for this gathering, expressing their resolve. Insecurity and unemployment top the list of reasons why they're calling for a change in government.
They are joined from our tertiary institutions and they join the colony of unemployed. We have made a position today, and that position is resounding and clear that the continuous operation in the Buhari administration must stop.
It started off as a peaceful protest, but not for long. With the police at the scene, the protesters dispersed, ending the protest abruptly, same way it did last year, with some protesters arrested. In Lagos, the protesters gathered as early as 10 a.m. at the state capital Ikeja. It was a light procession. But there was a pushback from the police. The action of the police was met with some resistance.
Police force have no right to disrupt a legitimate protest. We are a peaceful protester to march for our freedom. Revolution!
In the southwest state of Osun, the protesters are not in a large number, but their voice was loud enough to get the attention of authorities.
Victoria Santa! Victoria! Victoria! Victoria Santa!
The arrival of the men of the DSS threw the scene into chaos, with some protesters arrested. The founder of the revolutionary movement, Mr. Omoyele Sowore, is currently in a legal battle with the federal government after he was arrested last year for organizing a nationwide protest and calling for a revolution against the government, a move authorities have totally condemned.
Welcome back. So let's talk about the report you just saw. We've got Mr. Tokpe Akyode, who is the National President, Revolutionary Lawyers Forum. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. We also have Mr. Femi Adesina, who is the SA to the President on Media and Publicity, joining us via Zoom. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you both for joining us today. Let me start with you, Mr. Akyode. Well, yes, many may have heard some parts of why the protest is. So if you could just give us an update, why embark on this protest this time?
The protest is coming up as a result of the many failings of the Nigerian government. As it is today, there is high level of poverty in the country. Nigeria is well rated globally among the poorest countries of the world. There's unemployment, youth graduate from universities or tertiary institutions without gaining employment. There's rise in insecurity all through the country, especially in the northern part of the country. lives are being lost in large numbers by the day. And so it has become a matter of reasonability, a matter of common sense. It is a natural reaction that people, Nigerians, would naturally engage the government and criticize the government and disagree with the government on the poor policies of the government and the continuous failings of the government, like I said. So that's why the revolutionary protests are continued, and that's why it's held yesterday.
Yeah, in that protest across different parts of the country where the group are asking for a change of government. Is that right?
If failing government has no reason to stay, there's no point reinforcing failure. Nigerians have the right to demand for the resignation of a government that has been underperforming. But anyways, the demand of the protesters is clearly articulated and well noted. Provide employment, provide security for the people, improve the welfare of Nigerians. That's all. It's not too big to ask. If the government can provide that, why not? Anyways, it is a fundamental right of the citizens to make these demands. Okay,
Mr. Additional, you heard some of what he said about why they're protesting, but many don't understand the role of the authorities, why they think that it's not right for that protest to go on. But what did you think of the protest?
Well, was it really a protest? By my estimation, that just seemed like child's play, because protests by their very nature are spontaneous things. They are mass things. I just saw a sprinkle of people trying to be funny. As far as I'm concerned, it's nothing to worry about, because when you talk of a revolution is always a mass thing, not those sprinkle of young boys and girls you saw yesterday in different parts of the country. I think it was just a funny thing to call it a protest and a revolution protest.
Why does it sound to me as though you're talking down on these individuals? Because they are Nigerians. Yes, they are young, but they have a right to voice the issues they have. If you say that was not a protest, I mean, the definition of a protest basically saying, coming out to say, I don't agree with this. That's a protest. So you still think that was not a protest?
It's your opinion, and you have a right to it. You see, it's often funny to hear that you are talking down on people simply because you don't agree. You don't have to agree with everything anybody says. No, you don't have to. But it doesn't tantamount to talking down on anybody.
No, Mr. Additional, when you call it child's play, that's talking down on them. You use that term, it was child's play. No, it was what you said, Mr. Additional. You used the word child's play.
And I stand by it. And I stand by it. In a country of 200 million people, if you see that sprinkle of people saying they are doing a revolution march, it was like a child's play, I tell you.
So does government determine the weight or how seriously they take protests by the size or the number of people who speak up against it?
Well, it will always matter, because if you said it was a revolution by their natures are quite well known. Revolution is something that turns the normal order. What happened yesterday, will you call it a revolution? It was just an irritation. It was just an irritation. And some people just want to cause irritation in the country. And what I'd like to say is that when things boil over, they boil over because you continue to hit them. And when you see pockets of heating up in the country all over the place, eventually they culminate in a heating up, in a boiling over. So Nigerians need to know that the country we get is what we use our own hands to build.
Okay. Mr. Adesina, there were some issues that the young man raised, which was the reason for the protest, which, of course, you have defined it as you have. Rising unemployment, increasing poverty rate, and massive insecurity. Some of these concerns have been addressed, by you at some other fora. For them, it just doesn't seem like, it's hitting home. It just doesn't seem like whatever it is that government is doing is not hitting home. I think, you would also agree as a journalist that they have the right to at least raise some of these issues. How is government taking on those issues that they have raised?
Thank you. Now, the question I would also like to ask is, which country in the world doesn't have those issues? Almost none. Almost none, particularly at this time and season that the world is passing through. Which country doesn't have those issues? Those issues are like peculiar to every country of the world. Now, if government is striving and bending over backwards and doing its best to sort out these issues, and you then go out with these irritants and distractions, are you contributing to progress, or you are trying to pull back progress? All these things have been tackled by government. In fact, that is why government exists, to make sure that the quality of lives of the people is better. That is why government exists. And this is one government that has been working assiduously to ensure that life is better for the people. The larger number of Nigerians know and they understand. But the pockets of people that go on these irritating protests, well, good luck to them, is what I would say. If somebody would not say I'm talking down on Nigerians again.
Mr. Kiyode, you want to react to what you have heard Mr. Adesina say?
Absolutely. You see, we have to forgive Mr. Adesina and then the Buhari government for, all the things they spill. They don't understand these things. They are bereft of the fundamental workings of democracy and the rule of law. They don't know what protest means. They can't appreciate it. Buhari is a dictator. He doesn't obey court order. So he doesn't know that Nigerians or the people have the right to protest, which is why Mr. Adesina continuously was talking down on Nigerians, saying it was a child play, it was an irritation, and all sorts, because this government has no knowledge of the fundamental workings of a democracy. Having said that, you see, what I see is that the government is hell-bent on failing. This is a government that is underperforming largely. It's a woefully failed government. And people are coming out to criticize the government and to raise genuine concerns that affect their life. And the government is trivializing it. We are in a big problem. If you see yesterday the things that happened, you would discover that Nigeria is in a big, deep mess. As soon as protesters gathered, making demands from the government without having any arms on them, Nigerian government mobilized a combination of the army, soldiers, state security service, police force, and to attack protesters. And that was what it saw. And so this government is a government that has sworn to failure, to continue to monitor the unemployment in the country, to continue to monitor the high insecurity in the country, to continue to disrespect court orders, rule of law, and the fundamental rights of Nigerian citizens. This is what the government has sworn to.
All right, Mr. Kiyode, let me ask you.
It becomes an irritation for them if you raise these issues.
Well, let me ask you, when, because you also referenced that, look, the group calls itself Revolution Now. You're asking for a change of governments, and then you're asking for some of these issues as well to be addressed. So some may think that those are mixed signals. If you're asking for a change of government, the only way you can do that in a democracy is when you go out to vote the next time out. So in that regard, aren't you sending mixed signals to those who are listening to you?
You see, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed by the myopic definition that Mr. Adesina gave Revolution Now, especially being a journalist who should have fundamental knowledge of the English language. A revolution has many meanings to it. You cannot attach a single meaning to the word revolution. And
what is your own
meaning?
meaning?
Deficiency in the use of English language.
Give
Revolution
us your
can
own
also
meaning.
mean an improvement, an advancement in a system which has positive, long-lasting impact. The demands of the revolutionary protesters are well articulated. They are engaging the government on its failings, unemployment, low turnout in low unemployment, insecurity, non-payment of the 30,000 naira minimum wage, and many other things. And if the protesters are demanding for, the removal of the present government as it's constituted, is a constitutionally guaranteed right. The law allows for the impeachment of any validly elected government. And for a government as this, that has woefully failed as this, isn't it proper for it to resign, even on its own volition? So if protesters, if Nigerians make a demand for the government of the day, having failed this woefully, to set itself aback and let other people run the country, there's no big thing in it. It's a constitutional right that Nigerians can demand for. But that is not even the major demand, like I said earlier. That's not the major demand of the Revolution Now movement of protesters. The major demand of the revolutionary movement of protesters is to engage the government on its continuous many failings, which has now become an aberration, and which appears to be the order of the day of the Nigerian government.
Right, so let's get back to Mr. Adesina now. So, Mr. Adesina, Mr. Akinade is talking about engagement now. I mean, he has tried to define revolution. He has defined revolution the way the protesters see it. But now he's talking about engagement. Is that something the government is open to?
Well, let me make this point. Channels TV should have been ethical and professional enough to tell me that I was appearing with somebody. And I could then decide whether I wanted to appear or not to appear. The way this young man is talking, if I had a chance, I wouldn't want to share a platform with him because he is irascible, he is irrational, he doesn't understand. And I could have decided whether I was appearing with him or not. But I'm here, though I didn't know the nature of the person that was appearing with me. Well, I needed to have it too. Now, to your question, does government engage? Government does not exist in a vacuum. It's not like something in the sky. Government exists to serve with the people, to serve the people, and they engage with the people. If you don't engage with the people, how do you serve them? Government talks with the people, it gets feedback from the people, and those feedbacks inform the policies and programs of government. So for anybody to say there's no engagement, I think it's just theory. It's just theory. And you know, a lot of people like to just verbalize theories without knowing what actually is happening in their own country.
Mr. Adesina, about half the population of Nigeria are made of youths. Is there any particular way in which government engages this large number of Nigerians?
Oh, yes. Remember that there is a ministry for youths combined with sports, youth and sports development. I'm sure you got the information just 2 executive council meetings ago that a youth bank was going to be established with a large capital base just to empower Nigerian youths. You know that youths are today engaged through other means like Empower and all that, just for upkeep and existentialism. The youth bank is now coming for empowerment to set them up so that they could do things on their own. Now, that was done just 2 weeks ago. For somebody to now come to say no program, no policy, unemployment and all that, when government is doing all its best to even make things better for the entire country and for youths, it shows that some people don't just have understanding.
Okay, Mr. Adesina, add to that, the fact that some people would say that, the issues that are being addressed, the number of people that are being addressed with the Empower program, the number of youths that the Empower program is touching are just like maybe a sprinkle as well. I mean, some could say that. On the one hand is what the federal government is doing. On the other hand are what the states are doing and the kind of intervention or conversations that should be going between the federal government and the state government. So if a large number of people are having issues, do not have access to some of these issues that you have raised, some of these opportunities that you have raised, and the federal government's figures of unemployment are on the rise, don't you think they have reason to express some concern?
I agree with you. I agree with you that it's a sprinkle because Empower 500,000 youths out of like 30, 40 million, I don't have the exact figures of youths that need employment. When candidate Buhari was contesting in 2014 against the 2015 election when he was campaigning, I remember that he was using figures like 30 to 35 million unemployed youths. So the government realizes the problem. But you see, the problem will not be solved in one fell swoop. You will have to have policies, you have to have programs that will redound eventually to touch the life of these youths. It's not that you wave a magic wand and these problems disappear. And one of the most pragmatic things that have been formulated is this youth bank that is coming. Government can't be doing all these and some people come and they are shooting breeze and they say government should resign, it's inefficient, it's ineffective, it's not doing anything. No, please, I think I will advise you, don't just bring people that don't have understanding to come and say anything on your platform.
Okay, Mr. Akiyode, let's address the specific issues now. You have heard Mr. Adesina, and a significant number of things are being done at various levels, federal and state. Have you been able, or the number of people that you've talked about or spoken with, is there any way they've been able to constructively engage the people that they elected into office?
Of course. Part of the protest, which held yesterday, is a constructive way of engaging the government. Like I said to you, not just, as the way Mr. Adesina sees it, that a young guy, I'm a lawyer, and I have the understanding of the law. It is a constitutionally guaranteed right of Nigerians to protest. It's a settled law. As a matter of fact, the revolutionary protest has been sanctioned by the court. The court has given a judicial approval of the protest because it accords with the fundamental human rights of citizens. Last year, when the protest was disrupted by the government, security agencies, the federal government deciding on the legality of the revolutionary protest had to caution the Nigerian government and make a scapegoat of the Nigerian police force by ordering the police to make apologies on the pages of 3 different national dailies, front pages of 3 different national dailies, and to pay a deterrent fine of 1 million naira to protesters. So it is a constructive, legally recognized, globally approved way of engaging the government. In fact, it's the best way to engage the government. Right now, you have the spokesperson of the president have to react to this. The Nigerian government also, they have to make a statement on it because it is a fundamental right of the citizen. It is well noted. It is well
let me ask you as well. We'll wind down this.
In global practice.
What do you say to those? Just hang on a minute. What do you say to those who think that first, well, the leader, Shore, participated in the elections, he didn't win the elections, and now his group is leading a protest, and so the messages that your group is asking may be muddled because some will look at it from that prism, having been in an election. So the messages there may not be as clear as if it were someone who was not in an election. Do you get the point?
I get you, but there is no provision of the law that says that as soon as you engage in contesting
an election, law now,
you lack the right to engage the government. I will give you an historical, just something very simple. The present Nigerian president, Muhammadu Buhari, after he lost the election earlier in 2011 protested against the government of President Goodluck Jonathan. He led a protest. In fact, the protest was also disrupted and all that, and it has to be sanctioned by the court. That the Nigerian government does not have the right to issue permits to protesters. And the best the police can do to protesters is to ensure that their security is well preserved during the protest. So the present president has also engaged in many protests, flooded the streets, led protesters against a government in which he also contested and lost the election. Like I said to you, there is no provision of the Nigerian law that bars a contestant in an election
Mr.
from exercising his fundamental human right.
We're winding down now, and I would like to take Mr.
Adesina's
Adesina's closing statements. Thank you. So, Mr. Adesina, I mean, he has made his point, and we recall last year when this happened, it spiraled into a long, drawn, detention. In fact, U.S. lawmakers had to intervene, asking why Nigeria's Attorney General ignored court orders. You recall the invasion of a court by DSS and the eventual arrest. It turned out kind of messy, and a lot of people are wondering, has the government learned from that? Hope we won't have a repeat of that this time around.
No, the government will do whatever is right in the country, whatever is required to maintain peace, amity, equilibrium in a country. Government will do. What other governments will say may not particularly be cast in concrete. A government will do what is good for its people and the country at any given time. And it is the duty of government to ensure that there is peace and order in a country, just as it is also legitimate to have protests. I'm not saying protests are illegitimate. Protests, and the courts have established that, people can protest. But when a protest can cause a breach of law and order, it is also the rights and responsibilities of government to make sure that that does not happen.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Femi Adesina, essay to the President on Media and Publicity, and Mr. Tokpe Akiode, National President, Revolutionary Lawyers Forum. Thank you as well for coming on the program. All right, so we will turn our attention to another matter when we return. Please stay with us.
Page 357.
In 2019, the Senate constituted an ad hoc committee to examine the challenges confronting the country's electricity sector and why regular supply of electricity to Nigerians continue to be elusive. The committee held a roundtable discussion as well as several meetings and has come up with a report which the chairman presents during Wednesday's plenary session. Some of the resolutions recommended in the report include the introduction of cost-reflective tariffs, immediate removal of increased custom duties of 35% to allow meter asset providers clear meters stock at the airports, elimination of political interference from the NERC, alignment of the electricity value chain. But some senators argue that constant electricity will be a mirage in Nigeria with the present structure.
I want to say that privatization was very, very faulty. Both the DISCO, the GENCO, that is given into private hands, was highly compromised.
We need to get to the depth of this. There's a total mess and rot in this whole power sector. And I'm even for cancelling the whole thing, and we just start again and maybe buy back these some of these DISCOs and find a structured way to to pay them off.
Federal lawmakers were also alarmed at the disclosure by the chairman of the Power Committee that Nigeria stands to lose $1.2 billion if it pulls out of an agreement with Azura Power Plant to supply 450 megawatts of electricity monthly. According to the agreement, Nigeria loses roughly $30 million monthly to Azura IPP for gas generated, as the contract makes it mandatory for Nigeria to pay the sum whether or not the power generated is dispatched or transmitted through the national grid by the Transmission Company of Nigeria.
As a lawyer, I have looked at those agreements, especially the ones of Azura and Akugas. The way we are so tied is that the danger in Azura and Akugas is that if we default, they can draw down immediately from our foreign reserve. That is how we've been tied up. Once we default, they can go straight without reference to anything, and we signed and draw down from our foreign reserve.
In the light of genuine commitment, not only to ourselves, to the generation unborn, we must get solution to this problem and this problem now, please. And that is my submission.
The Senate is consequently calling for a review of all the existing contracts, including those on privatization. The upper chamber is also urging government ministries, departments and agencies to make provision to cover outstanding debts owed to distribution companies in the 2021 budget. Linda Akibi, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. Well, yes, indeed, Dr. Ayodele Oni joins us next. He is an energy law and policy expert to weigh in on all of these matters. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, you know how it is with electricity supply. So whatever agreements, whatever plans, programs that exist, if people don't see that they've got this on all the time, they will ask questions. So now there's been calls for renegotiation, cancellation of deals, start all over again. And now they talk about this Azura deal. What do you think of all of these calls, particularly for this particular deal?
Well, that's an interesting question. One thing we all fail to realize, however, is as answering the question, how desperate we were at that time. At the times we entered into those contracts, we indeed needed a lot of power supply. And the story hasn't changed. I understand that to the average Nigerian, what they want to see is electricity. But if it took us 30, 40, 50 years to destroy the sector, I think it's going to be unfair to expect that in a few years, things will go back to normal or things will be perfect. I do understand that some of those contracts, there may be issues, but they are pretty much commercial contracts. I don't see any mischief. I don't see any fraud in any of those contracts. That's my view. And I think you can't reverse the privatization at this time. It's going to have an adverse ripple effect, whether to the banking sector, across board. And it's not going to speak well of Nigeria as an investment destination. Those are my initial thoughts.
But you know, when you hear the Chairman Senate Committee on Power say, I'm a lawyer, and I know that these agreements that we signed, if we default, they will draw down about $1.2 billion from our foreign reserves. You assume that he's speaking from the point of knowledge. But the MD of the company, several times reading his article saying, look, they don't know where they got those figures from, that those are not actually true. So when you hear both statements, you can only wonder, what's going on?
Okay, yeah, very interesting. The Azura deal is a very interesting deal. It's private sector driven, and it did get a number of support from the government in terms of the partial risk guarantee, the World Bank partial risk guarantee, actually coming from the IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I mean, one of the two institutions that make up the World Bank. That's distinct from the World Bank Group, which is which has got a number of other institutions. Now, what must have happened is that they entered into a number of contracts. And this is what we see in the power sector, particularly because privatization is nascent in this part of the world with respect to the power sector. You know, if I take you back memory lane, you'd remember in 2010, there was the roadmap by the JEJ administration, that's Dr. Goodluck Jonathan administration. The idea was to kickstart the sector. We had the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, and we had the National Electric Power Policy. And those had not been implemented. If we had implemented those properly, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. So the government thought it was best to implement both documents, the policy and the law. And one of those things was to ensure there was privatization and to encourage and attract international investment. When Azura was negotiated, there was a power purchase agreement, and there was a put call option agreement. No one was going to come and invest in Nigeria. If you recall very well, there was the idea of the partial risk guarantee because no one was going to invest in generation because the distribution companies were not able to collect up to even 50% of the power sold. So if I invested in generation, it then means I'll pass on power to the consumers through the distribution companies, and then I won't be able to get my money back. Even if I sell through the bulk trader, which is NBET, which was what Azura sought to do, NBET would not be able to recover its monies from the distribution companies, who in turn, and then NBET would then not be able to pay Azura. So Azura had to think about, and the promoters and its lawyers had to think about creative ideas. And one of those things was the put call option agreement. And it also because you need to look at political risk, country risk. Okay, Nigeria is a destination. We've seen situations where contracts have been cancelled, there have been issues. We need to ensure that in the event that government does cancel this deal, they are obliged to then buy the power plant. And there is a formula in that document, both in the PCOA and the PPA for situations such as those. So it's not a situation paying a $1.2 billion. I don't think that's accurate. You won't see that anywhere in that contract. It's just that if you breach a contract, there'll be punitive measures taken, liquidated damages and all of those. That's what you see in the PCOA and the PPA.
So
and of course there was a partial.
So okay, you're suggesting that he may have come to that conclusion himself, but not based on the agreement that was signed.
Yes, not based on a complete understanding of the commercial structure and the structure for that particular independent power project.
Okay,
because
so
every project has go on.
So for a PPA, if one defaults, the character of PPAs, what should one expect?
Okay, it would depend. It would depend on a number of things. First, you would typically have a take-or-pay provision in your PPA, because remember that these projects are project finance. And when I use project finance, I don't use literally, I use in a technical manner, where you would have obtained substantial sums, and repayment will be based on incomes generated from that project. You cannot rely on the balance sheet of the company. So what you first have is a take-or-pay obligation. So if government does not take that power, if the TCN cannot wield that power due to no fault of Azura, there's an obligation to pay a certain amount, pay for a particular quantum of power. That's basically what I see. That's the first level. Another level which you typically see is then a buyout clause, or what you might have in the PCOA, a situation where if you do not, if there are certain situations where government defaults, and those defaults are fundamental, then Azura can pack up and say, you know what, you have an obligation to buy this plant from us, and this is the formula. The formula is pre-agreed. It's in the PPA, it's in the PCOA. So you pay us X amount based on number of years left, based on what the revenues would have generated and all of those. So I think he might not be speaking from a complete understanding of the contractual structure and the nuances and the requirements at that time. We're desperate. Recall from the 2010 roadmap, we thought by 2020 we would have about 40,000 megawatts of power. So government was desperate. Government believed that with Manitoba Hydro, if you remember that management contract with Manitoba Hydro, government believed that the transmission network would be fine, we'll be able to wield sufficient power. I guess that's why they went into that contract.
Okay.
So I do not see any mischief or fraud.
Doctor, just one moment. There was an issue that you raised earlier when Chimelin asked you a question about, the chances of default, and I would like you to expatiate on that. Perhaps that is the issue that the Senate or the National Assembly is concerned about. Well, you also referenced the fact that Nigeria signed a sort of a sovereign guarantee, and which, of course, just as you have also said, if there is a default, there is a liability. What are the chances of that default on our part, and what are the liabilities?
Okay, I'll take you back a little. You'd be speaking to the indemnity agreement signed by the federal government. You know what I think there are two key issues. The take or pay, maybe three issues. The take or pay under the PPA, the put and call option under the PCOA, and the World Bank partial risk guarantee. Now, for you to obtain the World Bank partial risk guarantee, there are at least three pieces of documentation. You've got a standby letter of credit, which the bulk trader would have given to Azura, for example, and in return, they'll get that standby letter of credit from the bank, from a commercial bank, and the commercial bank will want some form of guarantee that if Azura does draw down that standby letter of guarantee, it will get repaid. To get its money back from the bank. If it doesn't then get its money back from the bank, then the federal government needs to step in. That's where that sovereign guarantee of some sort, an indemnity, comes into play. So there needs to have been a number of defaults before you get there. So the chances are there, but the chances are minimal. So the first point where you may have a challenge is under the take or pay. So if you do not take power due to no fault of the IPP, for example, you would be obliged to pay an amount, whether it's take or pay or whether it's a capacity charge, such that whether or not you use that electricity, you pay X amount. I understand people have said $30 million and all of those. Also, because of confidentiality, I cannot go into specifics of that contract. Even though I have seen that contract myself, I can't go into specifics. That's one angle, take or pay. The other angle is when there's a more fundamental default. And then Azura, the investors, the promoters say, you know what, we're leaving Nigeria. You need to buy us out. We don't want this plant anymore, or we're selling all of our shares to the federal government. And then the federal government is obliged to buy those shares. There could be a waiting period of, say, 1 year. There'll be those dynamics. But the danger in that default and in not fulfilling your obligations is that, like the P&ID case, it can then take you to international arbitration. And if you look at the NIPC Act, I think it's section 24, 25, it gives leeway for international arbitration when you enter into such contracts. And that's it. And that also even goes to the issue around waiver of sovereign immunity, which has been controversial recently. I won't go into that because I've not been asked. So that's it. The chances are there, but I think it's in the extreme that those will happen. The first level will be the take or pay, where we would have to pay an amount whether or not we use that electricity. And we were desperate at that time.
Wow. Now that you bring up the sovereignty clause, just so you know, you are now being asked. Can you break it down so we'll understand? Like you said, it's been controversial. And for a lot of Nigerians, they want to know, what did we get ourselves into? And how do we even wiggle out of this, or at least wiggle around? So what does that entail, really?
Okay. Much of this is exaggerated in my view. Now, there is sovereignty. There is giving up your sovereignty. And there is the concept of waiver of sovereign immunity. I'll take you a bit historical. When you sue a sovereign, in fact, in some cases, you cannot even sue a sovereign. In many other cases, when you do sue that sovereign, and you have the opportunity, or you've gotten a judgment or an arbitral award, you cannot even enforce that. So imagine I lend someone money. Someone I know would typically default. That person then gives me security or collateral that is reasonable. I would want to go into that contract based on that security, especially if the returns are high. But imagine that even I cannot enforce that security, or I cannot take that security when the person defaults, particularly someone who is known to default regularly. That's what waiver of sovereign immunity is. Waiver of sovereign immunity just means that when you sue me, that just means that you can't sue me. One, you can. I've waived my right not to be sued. Secondly, you can enforce judgment against me. It's not an assignment of Nigeria's sovereignty. It's not. It's wrong to say that. It's just waiving an immunity you have, an immunity not to be sued, or an immunity such that enforcement cannot be made against you. That's what it means. It's not selling our sovereignty.
Shed some further light on this for us, if you will. Perhaps if I could hypothesize on this one. So, assuming maybe Party A gets an Exim Bank facility for a while, it's been executed, there's no default. And then Party A goes to source B and sources some facility, to develop certain infrastructure. And it turns out that that sovereignty clause is there. Now, in that regard, having looked at the record, if the person hasn't defaulted, or even if you default, maybe like a very negligible percentage, what does that entail if one were to activate sovereignty clause, having signed any of those? Does it allow the issuing party, the funding party, to pick and choose whatever facility they want, or how does that play out?
Okay, good question. Typically, what happens in commercial contracts, facility agreements and all of those, that structure, you'd have your security or collateral. So you have your security, which may be registrable or may not be. It's that security you typically chase. But for sovereigns, it will be a situation where you would have a money judgment, for example, or you may have assets like buildings offshore. It's unlikely that another sovereign will come into your country to seize your assets. That's not what happens. You get a money judgment, for example, under an arbitral award, and then you seek to enforce that. It's when that country then says, I would not give you that money, that you begin to consider its assets outside of that country. You wouldn't even go into that country to seize its assets. That's the way it works. So it's unlikely that it will be money judgment usually. That just answers the question. It will typically be a money judgment, except you've created security over certain assets.
Is it supposed to be specified?
Exempted.
So even if it's not specified?
No, if it's not specified, it will be money. Yeah, even if it's not specified, yes. You sue you sue that country, you go to international arbitration, and you get an arbitral award. It will be money, and then you try to enforce it. That's where the waiver comes in.
So, just to be clear, I know this is kind of thorny, just to be clear. So, right after that, if, fails to pay the money and then assets come into play, will they still be able to pick and choose those assets?
Okay, no. Yes or no? No, because there are certain assets you necessarily cannot touch. Military assets, you probably won't go into that country to take their assets. But if they have buildings outside the country, they have certain other assets. Countries usually have assets outside of their own jurisdiction. Those are what people or other sovereigns or other countries, DFIs, will typically change. But it usually never gets there. It usually never gets to that situation. And I can tell you that Nigerian negotiators have really done a great job in terms of ensuring that those assets that can be touched are not those that are fundamental to the country. One. Secondly, what you would even have more recently will be forward sale arrangements, where it doesn't even get to the assets in that sense.
Judging from the statements made at the Senate, it appears as though, the lawmakers are not pleased with that agreement. In fact, they're calling for a review, saying we need to look at this and ensure that it works for us. So stepping back a bit, I mean, you look at that take or pay agreement, or as you have called it. I mean, it sounds as though you continue milking a cow you're not exactly feeding, because if the country is not taking that power that is, generated, but you still have to pay on a monthly basis. It sounds as though you keep milking that cow, even though you're not feeding that cow as much. I mean, isn't that what it comes across as?
Not necessarily, and I'll explain why. Recall that every contract has got its tenor or its term. That's first point. Second point is, recall that investor has borrowed monies from the bank, and you've got a repayment schedule. So it's L or I water. So there's a minimum amount that has to be generated every month, or else that project in the first place will not be bankable. You wouldn't have that project. You wouldn't have your bridges. You wouldn't have your power plants. You wouldn't have a lot of infrastructure, because no one's going to lend them money except there's a guaranteed periodic payment, can be a weekly, can be a monthly. That's why in infrastructure type projects, you'd have capacity payment, you'd have take or pay. Take or pay more common for gas projects, capacity payments more common for electricity. So that's what it is. Otherwise, no one's going to lend you money. No lender, if it's conditional or it's contingent, no lender is going to lend you money because they need to have their own model. So there's a base model, a financial model that suggests that every month you'd make at least X amount, which would maybe be your capacity payment or your take or pay payment. So you'd also need to look at it from the investor's point of view, not just from the country's point of view, because the country has asked that investor to come in to invest borrowed sums, investors' monies, shareholder loans, shareholder funds, all of those. So you can't jeopardize it. You need to take it into consideration. Otherwise, being a third world country, you would get no projects if you do not accede to certain things. And even most countries in the world would. The US, you'd see situations, particularly when you go into contracts with the government, and when you go into contracts where their country go into contracts with sovereigns where their country risk or there are issues around the credit worthiness of the regime, then you need to be fair. You need to look at it from everyone's point of view. You need to look at the lenders, you need to look at the project developer, and then you need to look at the country. So yeah, who wants it the more? Does the country need power more than the developer needs to build that plant in Nigeria? They can take it to Sierra Leone, Senegal, Cameroon, anywhere else. So it would be unfair to just conclude that it's milking a cow. You went in, and also, like I said before now, there was some foundation to it. The belief was that the transmission system will be much better than it is today. That's why they brought in Manitoba Hydro under a management contract. So that's what it is. Yeah, you could call it that. So there are always two sides to a coin. You could call it milking, and it may also not be, depending on whether you're being fair and you look at it from everybody else's point of view too, beyond yours.
Let me attempt to see if I could take those views in context here, as you say. Now, the investor, perhaps the private sector investor, when you say that we're desperate and country isn't there to sign certain guarantees, now, still on that take or pay part of the entire deal. So yes, we know that the authorities there, perhaps the government, should have ensured that they have their own end of the bargain, so that in terms of when you take, you have the facility or capacity to distribute. So one assumes that if you're going into that kind of deal as a private sector investor, you'd have had all of those things figured out. Was that what played out here from what you saw?
Oh yeah, that's what played out. I mean, the private sector was going to cover the basis. Recall that they had some of the best lawyers internationally. They had DFIs, development finance institutions. We had some of the most sophisticated lenders, and they weren't going to take chances. And recall that you had serious country risks. You were just living. I'm not sure we had any regime change in democracy. You're a military country just coming out of military rule. You are known to have in the past. In the past, you are taking over assets. If British Petroleum became African Petroleum, there's been expropriation, whether it's creeping expropriation or direct expropriation. So all of those are taken into consideration when a call is made by both the lenders and the investors as to the bankability of that project. So yes, I mean, that's what it is. The private sector is going to cover their business. If I were to advise an investor, of course, I'm going to ask for many of these things. I know some of these things can no longer, we probably would never have a second Azura, but I mean, if I were to advise, I would ask for similar guarantees. I would ask for similar collateral, similar sort of contracts. That's the truth.
Okay, because I know
Except
that
I wasn't a lawyer worth my salt.
Okay, this is a power deal. So it's usually kind of different when investors are going into certain things and then they want the government to guarantee such that investors or those who are financing don't lose their money, because, I mean, if people think that some parties have a reputation, they always have to have, or they want to have their own end of the bargain sorted. But concerning the take or pay as well, sorry, I need to just take one more perspective on this particular matter. Now, when we take that power, is there any reason right now for us to be concerned about this deal, as the Senate seems to suggest?
Well, is there any reason to be concerned? I'll say yes and no. No, to the extent if we can't take that power. Yes, if we absolutely cannot. Now, our not being able to take it is purely our own fault, purely our own decisions or lack thereof. Purely our own. So you can't really blame the private sector. So I think it's a yes and no. Yes, considering the quantum you'll be paying monthly, whether or not you take that power. And no, because, I mean, the project took, 7 years? So in those 7 years, we should also have covered our bases. That's my own view.
Essentially, you're saying anyway. There is nothing we can do about this. We have to pay whether we can afford it or not, because that's what this sounds like.
It's not affordability. It's contracts. I mean, contract are sacrosanct. Imagine you paid 100 million naira for a property. Oh yeah, of course you can always. Parties choose to review contracts, and usually contracts would have review clauses. However, in that review, there will be basis for review. Is there a change in law? Is there a change in taxation? Is there a change in the economics of the project? You don't just wake up and say you want to change contract. Or else it goes to the root of the sanctity of contracts. And everyone is going to say, you know what, Nigeria is not a good investment destination. I'm going elsewhere. I'm going to Ghana. I'm going to Cote d'Ivoire. I'm going to Senegal. That's it. You don't just sign contracts. It took 7 years. It took maybe more to sign those contracts. So you can't wake up one day and just say we will. You can ask to renegotiate. I mean, you just need the other party to be reasonable. But in negotiating, remember that it's going to have a multiplier effect. Those guys have borrowed monies from countries, from shareholders, from even depositors' funds. So it's not as straightforward as we think it is. It's not. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad bargain. I mean, if our infrastructure is up to date.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Ayodele Oni, an energy law and policy expert, is also the partner at Bloomfield Law Practice. Thank you for your thoughts this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. We're back in a moment, everyone. Stay with us.
This is Channels Television's breaking news.
Well, news reaching us indicate that the police have taken over the Edo State House of Assembly complex in Benin City, they say, is to forestall a large plan to attack the facility. Now, the armed security operatives are currently gathered at the entrance of the complex in large numbers, and they're not allowing anyone entry into the complex. So the police have taken over the Edo State House of Assembly complex in Benin City, they say, to prevent any attack in building. You do remember that the former, deputy speaker had left, joined the APC, and then he was impeached, a new deputy speaker was put in place, and now perhaps this is what they want to avoid. So, but we'll bring you more stories on that as we get them.
In the meantime, we go to Ogun State, where schools may have resumed, but parents are reported to have protested 25,000 naira COVID-19 tests fees. Of course, the government has since denied or retracted that statement. So what is the story now? We have the Shegun Hassan, who is the SA media to the Ogun State governor. Thanks for joining us this morning. So please give us an update. What exactly is going on about this matter?
All right, thank you. My name is actually Remy Hassan, and I'm the Special Advisor, Public Communications and Media to the Governor of Ogun State. Back then, when we were planning the protocols for resumption of schools, especially for the exit classes, there were guidelines that we put in place for students to resume. It has to do with temperature check at the gate, no face mask, no entry, hand washing facilities in all schools, sanitizers in all classrooms, no assembly in the morning, no assembly at close, and all of that. But then that's for day students, because they coming in, as soon as they're done with classes, they exit the school premises from there. But for those who are going to be in boarding facilities, there are indeed schools in Ogun State that do 100% boarding. We had to come up with a separate protocol because their own stay in school go beyond the classrooms. They will have to stay in the hostel, the dining hall, the dormitory, and all of that. So more protocol had to come in, and one of them was the fact that every returning student in those exit classes using boarding facilities must undergo the COVID-19 test, so that even if they mingle, at least we're rest assured that the possibility of infecting each other will be near zero. And Ogun State has the highest number of private schools in Nigeria. And that essentially made it that majority of those who are in those boarding facilities are from private schools. Those in the government boarding facilities are just 500. And of course, the test doesn't come cheap. Even though the state has been responsible for all of the tests that has been done thus far. We had to now come up with a request from the private schools to know exactly how many their number of returning students in the exit classes are. Apparently, because they thought that data was going to be used for possibility of taxation, they were not forthcoming. When they finally came up with it, it wasn't complete. It was far less than even half the required disclosure. At this point, the government had no choice than to just make a blanket 50% discount. The test normally cost 50,400, and a 50% discount took it to 25,000, mainly because the disclosure wasn't there. Because even if you are going to discount anything, you just must be sure what you are discounting and what the scope in terms of cost will be.
What are they going to pay now?
When the protest came up, at the point when the 25,000 was announced, it turned out that the government had to respond that it was mainly because we don't have a full information on what we're actually subsidizing. So they came up with a figure on Monday, and it was about 5,000 students. And government looked at that and saw that it is still something government could cope with. The governor, in his wisdom, decided to make it absolutely free for everybody now.
So the students and parents have absolutely nothing to worry about. Does the same thing apply to public schools as well?
Like I mentioned earlier, if you've been following, public schools have just 500 students in boarding facilities. The rest are mainly day school students.
Now, apparently, one would expect that there's been a lot of conversation between the Ogun State government and the private schools, even the public schools as well, before this whole thing began. For that kind of communication about paying 25,000 COVID-19 tests to have gone out without the schools themselves being aware of it, it looks kind of questionable. What made that necessary in the first place?
Like I mentioned, prior to resumption, about a week before last week Friday, this mail was sent to the Association of Private School Owners, needing the details of their students who are in boarding facilities, especially because we realized that their own protocol for resumption will be different from the day students. The response to that request did not get to us until Friday, and when it came, it was incomplete. I called it partial compliance, which itself is non-compliance. So by Saturday, when the interface with the schools will hold to finally give a go-ahead to all the protocols, that was when this 25,000 communication was made, mainly because the disclosure was not total. And like I said, you cannot subsidize abstract. You cannot pay for what you don't know the scope of what you're paying for. But when finally the details came, it was clear to government that government could still cope with paying for it, and that exactly was what the governor did.
And one now wonders what would happen, peradventure, hopefully not, if a student tests positive for COVID-19. They're preparing for exams, by the way, August the 17th, and it's not feasible, for example, to get those results before they resume. So what's the plan? Because, these students have a future ahead of them. Will they miss the exam? Will they write the exam under certain conditions? What really is the plan for that?
For those who may go down positive in the course of this test, to start with, in their various intermingling in classes, there are procedures that protect everyone, use of face masks, use of hand sanitizers, social distancing, and all of that. And of course, it's part of the plan. Anybody that goes down with symptoms, isolation centers have been made available within every school. Since it's only exit classes that are there, isolate such person and quickly do a test. Our lab in Ogun State, 2 of them, have a turnaround time now of 24 hours. So we may not have the capacity to do more than 500 to 800 per day, but of course, because of the exigency of this situation, there is also the possibility of reaching out to other places to also assist because of this. But then 2 weeks is long enough for all of these to wrap up before the exams proper begins.
Well, Dr. Lawrence Olumide joins us now. He is the President, National Association of Proprietors of Private Schools, NAPS, Ogun State. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Well, the issue on the burner is that of the COVID-19, 25,000 COVID-19 tests fee that parents were supposed to pay. Where do schools stand on this? Initially we have been made to understand that schools were requested to submit certain statistics, but you guys were not upcoming on time.
Hello.
Dr. Olumide, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Good morning.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, good morning. I want to appreciate the privilege to come up, Channel Television.
Yes, sir.
I didn't quite get that your question because I lost the network.
Okay, let me come with the question again. The government of Ogun State said they made some requests to you to provide some statistics to aid them in knowing whether or not there's going to be some kind of intervention. But the schools were not forthcoming. The management of schools were not forthcoming with those statistics on time. Is that true, and why is that?
Well, I don't know
how that should be an issue. In fairness, the idea of a student hostel and the rest, came towards the end of the design of the guidelines for reception in Ogun State. And in the process of that, we got an info that we should supply a population of students in respective schools that have a hostel. Almost immediately, we responded, because responding was an online thing. Almost immediately. But the argument we are trying to advance here is that there is no basis, there is no reason for discrimination. As far as we are concerned, if government was actually planning to give discounts or to give, to subsidize for what? If you are not subsidizing for students in public school, why are you subsidizing for students in private school? Are they not from the same community? Are we not part of Ogun State? That was the agitation of parents, of which I am one. There is no basis for looking for data of population of students that either the Ministry of Education should have beforehand. Now, the point is this: government is making provision for students in public schools. What is the offense of parents having children in private school? It is not the money that is the issue. The issue is the discrimination. Why the discrimination? I believe that was the exact thing that the parents, that got the parents agitated, and thank God for a listening governor that looked into the issue and felt, it has to be done in the right way. So we are happy in Ogun State that His Excellency has done the right thing by reversing that act of discrimination, which is uncalled for.
Right. Well, there's been this talk, teachers saying that they're not going to resume if they're not protected. And I recall we were wondering, what does protection mean? What's the definition of protection? And would like to know, schools have resumed, what kind of protection is being given to teachers? Because that's important. Yes, we've talked about students, but what kind of protection are teachers going to get? Is there a standard, a minimum standard that all schools have to abide by?
All right, now we are looking at private school here, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello? Yes, now at our level, you agree with me that private school, we have this personal touch. We have control over our employee. We have control over the student to a large extent. Now, don't forget that we are not saying that the students will get infected with COVID-19 from teachers. There is equally probability that students could turn around to infect teachers and employees of the school. So we are not protecting the student alone. We are equally protecting ourselves. This is the reason why in Ogun State, I doubt if there is any school that is government approved, that is under our association, National Association of Proprietors of Private Schools, that has not procured all the necessary gadgets that can safeguard individuals. Starting from the use of nose mask, we have touchless hand washing stand that we have dispersed to our members across the state. Those that couldn't afford the touchless, we have encouraged them to get buckets with taps, with soap. We have produced hand sanitizer as association, alcohol-based.
Okay, Dr. Olumide, just one thing before we come back to the SA media, to the Ogun State governor. Well, he has said the other time that one of the reasons for making that request of schools in Ogun State is the peculiarity of boarding schools, that they're not just going to be going home and coming back, they are going to be staying in schools, and consequently they needed to take more proactive action. The protocol for boarding schools needed to be a little different, a little more intense than for those who are day school students. How do you react to that?
It means it was not well thought out. Thank God the governor was not aware of it from the beginning until the parent began to agitate, because the governor, as I learned, had to summon the commissioner of health and the SA to the governor on education. all right, before the issue, was kind of resolved. Now, if you are talking of students in the hostel, to the best of my knowledge, I believe the students in the hostel are even more, they are better saved than students coming from home. Coming from home, don't forget, they will enter taxi. They will walk on the streets. They will go home to go and meet their parents that have gone out in the neighborhood. So they will come back to school, but we are talking of students that once they log into the school system now, they are in the school, all right, and we are not allowing visitors. We are not even allowing their parents to come. So they are better, they are safer than students coming from home and returning home, because you don't have control over the student the moment they leave the school.
Okay, just hang on a minute. Let's bring Mr. Hassan on this one, because I'm sure he has quite a number of responses to give to you. But Mr. Hassan, in addition to some of the responses you may want to give, so it does appear as though, well, it's not that it was the fault of the schools for not providing those details. As you said, they were not forthcoming, because he says, as soon as we provided it, it came much later. And besides, you should have had those information, those data in the first instance.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain. Again, I say, partial compliance is as good as non-compliance. There were those who complied, no doubt. But like I said, Ogun State is peculiar. We have the highest number of private schools in Nigeria. And if some of the private schools responded, that will not paint the proper picture of planning that we need. The data was insufficient.
So
and you
does it mean that Ogun State government you don't have those figures from the Ministry of Education by themselves?
At the level of having those who are in boarding schools, no. But in terms of the schools intake, yes, we do. Because the schools sometimes have reasons to expand their boarding facilities. So even if they start with some figures at the beginning, it is possible that at some point it will have increased. There are schools in Ogun State that do no day schools. They are 100% boarding, and they are bound all around Ogun State. So partial compliance, I repeat, is as good as non-compliance. And if we don't have all the data that we need, it cannot help us in planning. And like I said earlier, you cannot subsidize abstract.
Okay. If you didn't have figures for private schools, do you have figures for public schools in Ogun State?
I made that disclosure earlier. Okay. For all of our boarders in Ogun State, in boarding facilities, 500.
So why did, he was asking, why that discrimination? Why go for private and then you leave that of the public schools?
The number in public schools is so few, it is something that could be coped with. The number in the private schools were not initially completely supplied. And that did not put us in the picture of if it was something we could cope with. Because believe it or not, the lab may have been provided by the state, but that represents just like a kitchen. It still requires you buying ingredients before you can cook good food. And the reagent with which this test is done has to be procured with money. So if we don't have the true picture of the number that we are actually testing from private schools, what are we talking about?
So given the benefit of his response, when he then, suggesting that the unintended consequence of that action was that they thought it was discrimination and so they didn't internalize it well. So do you think it was a good thing to have come up with that policy or that strategy in the first instance?
To start with, private schools cannot be put on the same stead as public schools because they are in it for money, we are in it for service. That is the difference at initial. However, when it has to do with the health of the populace, the government has to take responsibilities. So for him to come from the angle of discrimination, sorry, we are not discriminating as a government, but of course those who want class in the name of quality education have gone for what they believe is class on their own level. So at that level, why is he not talking about discrimination for people patronizing private schools and not public schools? At the same time, are we saying that those who are in public schools are lesser being if government decide to take responsibility for them, as we have done in this case, even for private schools?
All right, Dr. Olumide, you heard him say, you guys are, the public schools are for service, private schools are for money. And consequently, you need to be able to pay for some of the services that government may have to provide for you. How do you react to
that? Honestly, you see, the 25,000 of a thing incidentally wasn't meant for school owners to pay for it. It was the parent of those children involved that will have to pay for it. So it is not about us, it's about the parent. All right. So if you are now putting a bill on the parent because school owners are in school business, I mean, it doesn't correlate. Now, let us look at it from this way. As a school owner, we pay taxes to government. So if you are bringing COVID-19 payment for test out, that is another taxation if you are directing it to school owners. If you are directing it to parents, that's another taxation for the parent, because we ask, those that were infected, that were tested, were they made to pay for it? Those that were in the public, those that were infected with COVID-19, that were tested and treated, government paid for it. So why should we? Well, there's no reason why parents should be made to pay for the test of COVID-19 results in an ideal situation. Like I repeat, I believe that the right thing had been done. So there's no point, there's no basis arguing over this again. Thank God for the life of our governor, who had seen who has seen the side of the parent and has reasoned along with them. I give kudos to him. So once the issue has been resolved, I think we can move on with our lives. So we have so much to do together.
Speaking of moving on, I mean, yes, exit classes have resumed, but there will come a time, hopefully sometime soon, that the whole school, I don't know how phased it will be, would also have to resume. Would you also be telling the government to maybe foot the bills of that test at that point, now that we're talking about moving on?
Do we also what?
Would you also be asking for the government to foot the bills of the test of students, other students that are not in exit classes, maybe when schools eventually reopen fully? Would you also be asking, the government to pay for their tests, maybe?
Well, I want to strongly believe that that will not happen. You see, one thing about this test of 18, that test is valid only as at the point the test is conducted. You can be tested today, all right, even while you are waiting for the result of the test. And then you get contacted, if you have contact with somebody who had COVID-19 and you get contacted. So you may end up having...
Dr. Lumide, let me jump in and bring it back to Mr. Hassan. Apologies there. Well, Mr. Hassan, what is the state government satisfied with the compliance level with all those protocols upon resumption?
So far, we have no reason to be pessimistic. At the schools level, we've seen quite a lot of pointer to the fact that we've done what we need to do, both at the private and the public schools levels. The students themselves were joyous to return to school, and we've seen compliance with all the guidelines. And we can only hope, because this is a test case. Believe it or not, bringing students back to school in such a clustering environment, though there are protocols notwithstanding, it is a test case. And whether the whole school will resume or not, this is going to be a pointer to the fact of what will happen going forward.
We'll widen this briefly, but I was asking Dr. Olumide earlier about what happens moving forward. I mean, will the government also be willing to expand this when the full school resumes, to say, oh, yes, we're going to sort the test for other students as well?
In the present reality of the Nigerian nation, wholesale test is not possible at this time. However, temperature check and other kind of screening that points in the direction of symptoms, discovery and what have you, will be taken up by government, just so that we're sure that nobody goes down with any symptoms. And those who are symptomatic will be tested by government free of charge.
What? Yeah.
I mean, I was going to widen this really because, yes, schools have resumed, and a lot of people are wondering what happens to worship centers and other places that have been closed for months now. Are you going to be looking into that too?
Yes, worship centers have already been given 14th of this month to reopen, and of course for a maximum of 200 worshippers. But if you have worship centers that accommodate more than 200 and you still want that number exceeding 200, you have to call for special request by the state government to come and look at the facility and look at the protocols that you have put in place just so that people are safe. And we've received quite a lot of requests from people, and by tomorrow, one of them will be visited in Ota. Some other ones will be visited around the Mowe Bafo axis next week. All of this is just to be sure that in reopening, we're not reopening to disaster.
Okay, so are you satisfied so far? Well, you said some churches or worship centers are calling for visits. There was a visit that the Ogun State government had some time ago. I hope you were satisfied with that one.
Yes, there have been some that we've been to, especially the mass gathering kind of worship centers. At the level of the Islamic people, you will notice that majority of the mosques are such that are built to accommodate large crowd. So they were the first set of people who even requested that we visit their place, and of course we were able to advise them on what needs to be done, just so that everybody is safe in the circumstance. Okay. We visited some places, we're satisfied with some, and there are those that we've told in the circumstance there is a lot more you need to do before you can reopen with the number that you're asking for.
All right. Remy Hassan, SA Media to the Ogun State Governor, thank you so much for your time, as well as Dr. Lawrence Olumide, President, National Association of Proprietors of Private Schools, NAPS in Ogun State. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having us.
All right, then. So there you go. That is the show today. We thank you all for watching. Now for your comments as well. We'll see you again here tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Kayode Okikere.
And I'm Ayo Makine. Have a wonderful day, and please keep safe.